So, I wanted to talk to you about this coronavirus induced gap between supply and demand.
Yeah, sure.
So, how much more supply do we need in the United States? Could you kind of quantify that?
That's a really good question. And the answer is no one knows exactly how much we need because no one knows exactly how bad this is going to get. One way of quantifying this is to look at the gap between what states are asking for and what they're getting from FEMA. So, one district, a group of states, asked for 4 million N95 masks. Those are the ones that filter out 95% of particulates. And they got 500,000. When it comes to ventilators, we know how many ventilators we have in this country. It's around 200,000, and that includes some older ventilators, some less fully featured ventilators, like not best case scenario. Hospitals say, looking at where they are now and with the expectation that these cases are going up, that they definitely need more of them and fast.
Seems like the immediate reaction we're seeing is that companies that don't normally make these supplies are now making them. So, how does something like that work?
Right. So it's important that there are different kinds of masks. There are also different kinds of ventilators. So if you think about something like a fabric face mask, which is now starting to be recommended as something that you might wear around outdoors, those aren't too heavy of a lift. But if you're looking at something like an N95 mask, again, that sort of gold standard mask for medical professionals, that requires a really particular kind of material. So access to that raw material becomes a limiting factor on how much you can make. So one thing that the federal government has done is they did place a very large order for masks that are made in the United States. A lot of these masks, a lot of this personal protective equipment in general, has been made in China. That's obviously a challenge right now when all the world wants these supplies. Some of those masks won't be delivered for months, but it means that companies can invest right now in the resources that they need to build these more of these masks, and know that they'll be able to sell them later on to the government.
Right. And let's talk a little bit more about ventilators too, because I feel like there's a little bit more to unpack than just with face masks. How exactly are we handling this ventilator shortage?
Yeah, so one big thing that's happening is that some ventilator companies here in the United States that normally have very, very low production numbers are rapidly and massively increasing their output. And they're doing it in some cases with help from the automakers. And the automakers have two advantages. One, they're used to manufacturing on a vast scale. And two, they have relationships with suppliers that can help them solve some of these supply chain challenges. The president was also ordering Ford and GM to make these devices, but it was a really confusing period there for a couple of weeks. There were public statements from the White House about mandating that Ford and GM make these devices.
This afternoon, I invoke the Defense Production Act to compel General Motors to accept, perform, and prioritize federal contracts for ventilators.
Ford and GM said that they were voluntarily starting production anyway without needing orders from the federal government. And meanwhile, there actually hadn't been orders placed by FEMA committing to buy these ventilators. So I mentioned that with the face masks, the government placed a giant order to give companies, the confidence to be able to ramp up production and not worry about being caught flat-footed. And as of the end of March, it hadn't happened yet with ventilators.
We thought that we had to deal with, as an example, General Motors, and I guess they thought otherwise. They didn't agree. And now they do. They do agree, and I think we might be able to pull it.
I would just say that what's happening in the manufacturing sector is happening very quickly. So some of the messaging from the White House was chastising companies for not working fast enough. But in just the matter of a couple of weeks to either increase production in the levels that we're seeing or start a brand new line, it's really been a remarkably fast effort.
So, let's talk a little bit more about the government's response. We've been hearing a lot about the Defense Production Act. What exactly is that? And what does it mean if the federal government invokes that, if the president invokes that?
Yeah, so the Defense Production Act is something that gives the White House the authority to dictate what private companies do for the sake of the national interest. So you can order that a company make something they don't normally make. That's gotten a lot of attention. You can have a government order take priority over all other orders. You can also step in and control the supply chain. They can also manage the distribution of the output. So the DPA has multiple elements to it. It's used routinely, parts of it, by the Department of Defense to give priority to government contracts. Other parts of it aren't used very often at all. But manufacturers and states have been asking the government to use one part of the DPA in particular, which is managing the distribution of the scarce resources that we have. So companies say they're going flat out to make as many of these as they can, but there's pretty wide consensus between manufacturers and states that ideally you would have FEMA determining where these limited resources go instead of having states fight with each other on an open market.
Right. Thanks, Camila. We'll be checking in more as the situation kind of moves forward. Things are changing at such a fast rate.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. I'll be here. Right here.